Hello, my name is Julie, and it's time to talk about all the books that I read in September. So, July and August of 2024 were my biggest reading months of all time. In July, I broke my most pages of all time, and in August, I read almost that many pages. It would have broken my previous record, but I did break my record for the most amount of books that I read. So in September, I was like, can we chill out a little bit? Let's pump the brakes before I burn out. Although I do read through reading slumps, I don't want to cause one. I still did read quite a bit, but not as much as that, especially because in the back of my mind, all I'm hearing is that September 2023 was my worst reading month of all time in terms of quality. I had like an average of like a 3.2 or something. So I was like, I just need to enjoy myself. So let's see if I did. So in September, I read 11 books for a total of 4,392 pages. That's right in the middle of where I've been reading this year. Average rating of 3.57 is just below average, but not to a statistically significant amount. I have one book right now that I think I'm gonna give a 5-star from this group. Average page count was 399 pages a book and 146 per day. I only read 2 books from my shelf this month, so lots and lots of library books. I added 3 books to my TBR. I actually did do an unhaul this month, so I did unhaul 2 books from my TBR, so I should be at a -9. I haven't actually physically gotten rid of the books yet, so you might count that as a -7. And those star ratings, you can see we had a whole bunch of 3-star books this month, unfortunately, but you know, you might still find something you're interested in. Let's look at those pie charts real quick. Genres, as you can see, I read a shit ton of fantasy this month. So 5 of the books that I read were standalones and the rest were in series, and a good amount of those was getting through sequels and concluding novels. That's also why that fantasy level is higher, because I've been very aware of how many series I have going on lately, and I'm trying to get that number down. As for mediums, we got 2/3 physical. I actually think I read my first ebook of this year, and then the rest were audio, and I read 1 young adult book mixed in with the rest of the adult. So let's get started on those reviews, shall we? The first book that I read in September was On the Savage Side by Tiffany McDaniel. This is a book that is inspired by the Chillicothe Six, who were 6 real women who over the course of 2014 and 2015 went missing or were murdered, and a lot of them were not perfect victims. Several of them were sex workers or drug users, and the case has not been solved as to what happened to them. And this book is Tiffany McDaniel's sort of ode to the victims. All of the characters that are in this book are fictional, but they are supposed to be representations of the type of people who were harmed by whoever did these crimes. Our main character, Ark, and her sister Daffy are twins, and they grew up in a household with a lot of drugs in it. They were taken in by their grandmother for a couple of years and then brought back to that same household. And when the 2 of them are adults, and they have fallen victim to the same things that took their parents, and they have this group of friends, and one by one, the women start going missing and end up turning up in the river. So I previously loved Tiffany McDaniel's Betty. I think that book is flawless. Like there's seriously not a single thing wrong with that book. And I was really excited to see her next one. And I, unfortunately, was not as big of a fan of this book. I am in the unpopular opinion of this, but I think that Tiffany McDaniel does do a good job of portraying how hard it is to fully get out of addiction. They don't have like support systems to really keep them out of addiction, and how these people are still worth things. Like, just because somebody is a drug user does not mean that they should not have the same respect, and that the law should just ignore what happened to them. And we see that these people do care about each other intensely, and every single loss is felt. However, I really did not agree with the writing of this book. Every single line of dialogue in this book is so like lofty and metaphorical. Nothing was ever like a sentence like, I am going to the store. It was, everything had to be some sort of like simile or metaphor. If this was only one character, you know, and that's how that one character talks, sure, whatever. But it being like every single character no matter what this person's function in the story was, every single person is using the same type of weird language that like nobody's just saying the things that they mean, even when it's sort of a mundane conversation. There is a sort of plot twist at the end, which I was not expecting from this book, and honestly, it felt cheap to me. It felt like it was from a totally different genre of book. That it didn't feel like it fit with what the tone of the whole book was. I understand like its function for the book, but it didn't feel like it fit with what the rest of the book was doing. I'm giving this book a 3.5. This does a lot of great things when you're talking about the actual content of the book, but the way that it was written got on my nerves for some reason. Also, I'm sorry if I lose the lighting. It has been cloudy off and on today, and I have no idea what the lighting is going to look like for this. And this is kind of my only chance to film. The second book that I read was The Stardust Grail by Yumi Kitase. This is my book club, 3 of Clubs book for September. So our last quarter, we were reading rogue books. If you would like to join us in October, November, and December, we are going to be reading gothic fiction. What is going on with the lighting? What is happening? Alrighty, I think that's the best it's getting. Hopefully that's okay. In October, we are going to be reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. A lot of us are rereading this book, and that's cool. And in November, we are going to be reading Summer Suns by Lee Mandelo. So if you would like to join us, you can find the link to the Discord in the description. But back to Stardust Grail. This has been described as like a sci-fi Indiana Jones feel. Our main character used to steal artifacts from museums, and now she is back on Earth and she is working at Princeton. She's trying to get a post-grad degree to actually do stuff with museums because she's trying to leave that past behind her. But she has this best friend who is part of those many heists with her, and that friend happens to be an alien race. It has had a lot of problems, like major extinction level problems lately, and there is an artifact called the Stardust Grail that is supposed to be super important to the alien race of her friend, and when she is hired to go steal it, she decides to go against that employer and steal it for herself because the humans just kind of want to use it so they can advance technology. It's like the Killmonger thing of like stealing back culturally significant things from museums that aren't for those people. This book rides that line between being comedic and being serious, where sometimes like our characters are saying funny things or like it's kind of lighthearted as we're learning about like 1 ounce of world building. And on the other hand, there's these really serious like life-threatening things that are going on, like species-threatening things. But this book is only like 325 pages. Like, it's really not that long. And I was really intrigued by a lot of the world building going on. How humanity was the newest species to be added to this like intergalactic network. And there are like different portals between planetary systems and just like the politics of how these different species are interacting with each other, especially when species have, you know, wiped out each other in the past. And I wanted this book to go further. Like, there were really interesting seeds of information that I feel like the book grazed past or could have expanded on more, or just like could have taken its time with to make it better. Like, I also, like, at the end of this book, like, I wanted it to have had more after it. I feel like because it was splitting the tone, it kind of split the attention of the book, and the book wasn't that long to begin with. And I thought it was really interesting that the author has these 2 characters that are diametrically opposed, has them work in tandem, but never has them solve their issues. And even if like they don't want the other person to die, like they each have their loyalties. And I think like you as a reader are supposed to have an opinion of one person has the right way. But I think that's a very realistic thing of like, you can't always change people's minds. I wanted this book to do more than it did. This is another book that I'm giving in the 3-star area. I am still interested in reading The Deep Sky, which was the author's debut, and I heard that that is very different than this, so I'm still interested. Then I had a fall reading vlog in which I read books that I thought would give autumnal vibe. If you haven't caught that vlog, you can watch that here. But the first book that I read was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I'm so glad I finally got around to this, because I read Bookshops and Bone Dust last year for my book club because everyone had read this and I hadn't yet, and I knew I was going to enjoy it, and I did end up enjoying it. So this is about Viv, who is an orc. She was a sword for hire, and then she comes across this magical artifact that says that it will help you get your heart's desire, so she decides to quit and open up a coffee shop, which is not a common thing in this world. And a lot of this is her trying to build this shop from nothing and what little money she has and try to make a living, and also trying to put her past behind her. This is, as I said in the video, the flagship cozy fantasy book. This book absolutely took off 2 years ago and is sort of the reason why the cozy fantasy genre has been so popular the last 2 years. And I think that this does a lot of interesting things because it does have that D&D setting. We have the high fantasy vibes without having this massive fantasy plot. It does have a serious plot line on top of the cozy let's build a shop, but I think this does a really good job of blending the types of plot lines. I did not think that the prequel did as good of a job blending those. I really enjoyed reading this because it felt to me like doing a management video game, like where you run a business. I think I could have been more emotionally attached to the characters than I was, but I still had a really fun time, so I'm giving this a 4-star. Then I read What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. This is the second book in the Sworn Soldier trilogy, which the first book is What Moves the Dead, which is a horror, a little bit of fantasy novella that is a reimagining or expansion of the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. And this book is a sequel that is following the main character from that, but it has nothing to do with The Fall of the House of Usher. Instead, this book involves the Moroi, which is a creature from Romanian folklore. So our main character, Alex Easton, is a soldier that comes from this fictional country, and in this book we are seeing as Alex and a couple of their friends go to their home country for the first time and go to this hunting lodge to have a fall vacation. However, something is strange because the groundskeeper died, and the people of the town believe that it is a creature called the Moroi, which appears as a woman who in your sleep will sit on your chest and try to steal your breath and give you nightmares. I did prefer What Moves the Dead. While they have like a similar tone, they function in different ways because they're going about different horror things. I think the flavors of the horror are different. I also felt like the build-up did not work as well for me. Like the payoff I did quite like, versus the first book, like the whole time I'm kind of freaked. But I thought that this book did a fantastic job of blending having PTSD into a horror setting. Alex is kind of thinking, well, is this just me, or is there something actually going on? And I thought that the way that that was addressed was very well done. There were some creepy moments here or there, and it was pretty short, so I think it's worth picking up if you did like the first book. I'm giving this another 3.5. Is everything a 3.5? I don't know. Then the last book that I read in my vlog was One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is a fantasy romance title that has been pretty popular on Book Talk recently, which is about our main character, Elspeth Spindle, who has grown up in this kingdom where the only legal way to use magic is with these cards that are like tarot cards, but there is an infection that often takes children that gives them magical abilities but also kind of withers them away, and the kingdom has ruled to kill all those children. And Elspeth had this, and she has been hidden by her family that she ever had the disease. The magic that she does have is that A, she has the ability to see other people holding magical cards, and she has some sort of creature in her mind that she calls a nightmare. And so our main character gets thrown into this plot with some of the nobility of trying to track down the most powerful of these cards. I had my reservations about this book because of where it was kind of getting recommended to me from, but I had been told it was like a really unique flavor of fantasy that like fantasy romance isn't always doing. So maybe this is something I like. Fantasy romance in the past has been one of my favorite genres, but in the last couple years, I've really struck out. I thought this would break my streak, and unfortunately, it did not. I did not like this book. I do agree it has a unique feeling to it. It does have a dark fantasy vibe. It has like the feeling of a dark fairy tale, but I was just not attached to any of these characters. I think these characters were two-dimensional at best, and I feel like this book kind of hinges on you liking the characters to actually get on board with the book. I was under the impression that this was going to like be a little bit more like a sweeping fantasy, and it does feel very small. It feels like it could take place in almost a village, except for the people we're hanging out with are princes and stuff like that. One good thing I'll say in this book's favor is that just about every single fantasy romance, especially first book in a series that I've read lately, kind of does the exact same like plot ending, and this book did not do that. It did have a different ending, so I was very happy about that. But like really, I just could not get invested in this book. The writing really bothered me. It felt like it was like trying to be smart, and it just did not work for me. And I honestly thought about DNFing it were it not for a vlog and it being very easy to get through. And so I ended up giving this a 2-star. Then you're wondering, Julie, you've gone through half of your books and you've not talked about a single audiobook yet. And that's because for like 25 days, I was listening to the audiobook of The Burning White by Brent Weeks. This is the final book in the Lightbringer series, so I am so happy to finally have this series done. This is an epic fantasy series. It's got a little bit of urban fantasy just in terms of the technology we've got. This has a magic system that is based around the light spectrum. Some people have the ability when the type of wavelength of light, like green light or red or even infrared light, they can store that and then draft, which is like having some sort of physical manifestation of that light. But it's a very interesting magic system. And one of our main characters in the first book is Gavin Guile, who is the Prism, who is essentially the Emperor and has the ability to draft every single color. And at the beginning of the first book, he finds out he has a bastard and is going to investigate that. And a lot has gone on since then, because each of these books is like over 800 pages, and this is book 5. I was really nervous because I was not a fan of book 4. That is a popular opinion. And I had heard that book 5 was the worst in the series. And I happily disagree. I think that this series does such a good job characterizing. I think these characters really do pop off the page and make me care about them. There are like 4 different characters that we regularly flip back to, and all of them, you know, feel very distinct and have their own journeys that they're going on, and their paths split and come back together in pretty satisfying ways. Book 4 I really struggled with because I felt like we did not get any improvement on the characters. It felt like they started and stopped in the exact same place, versus this book, I think it really did feel like a culmination of a lot of their characters. And it has some of like what I would consider some of the most epic scenes in the series, and I did really like how we got a sort of backstory of one of the side characters. The main complaint that I have seen online, I do understand, but I don't 100% agree with, is Deus Ex Machina. Most of the book is like leading up to this battle at the very end, and there is so much build up, and then you get to like the last 100 pages and the battle isn't really starting yet. It felt short, and it felt like some things were resolved quickly because of some developments that happened in this book, rather than feeling like they necessarily paid off things going on for the entire series. Like individual like efforts of the characters weren't necessarily rewarded. It was other new things that were being rewarded. I would say that the ending portion of this book is its weakest point, but that really doesn't negate how strong the rest of this book was, and it was absolutely worth a read. It was absolutely worth the 25 days that it took me to read this, and it was totally worth reading this series. So, personally, I would rank books 2 and 3 as the best books in the series. I would rank book 1 and 5 at that second place point, and then I would put book 4 at the bottom. So if you're looking for an epic fantasy series to get into, I've really been recommending this a lot because I have neglected this series so much. Every time I would go without reading a book for a while, I would forget how much I actually did enjoy the series. One complaint that really never gets fixed is there is a lot of fat phobic comments in this series. Beyond that, I really do feel like this is a fantastic book. Kip is one of my favorite fantasy characters that I've ever come across. He's just such a good dude. That is my favorite fantasy trope. I really love just the character who is like loyal to a fault and will do the right thing no matter what. So I'm giving this more than just a 4-star. I definitely don't think it's a 5, but in that 4.25 or 4.5 for sure. Then I read The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is a 2024 fantasy release that is supposed to be a fantasy version of a Holmes and Watson type mystery. The light is dying on me, so I don't know what's gonna happen, but this is about our main character, Din, who has been hired as the assistant to an investigator. They get hired to investigate a death in which this man had just trees grow out of his body, which to the reader seems very strange, but we eventually get to know that there are different natural based like supplements and like grafts on skin and different technologies that are using, plants and bacteria that are in this world, but still, that death was strange. They quickly uncover that there's some sort of conspiracy happening because there were multiple people who died right around the same time from this very strange death. And this is also set in this world that kind of feels a little bit Attack on Titan-like, in that there are these walls around society and there are these giant leviathans that are trying to knock down the walls. So the first third of this book I was so into, and the further it went, the further I wasn't liking this. I think this has been an opinion that I've been seeing from other people, but if you're gonna pitch yourself as a murder mystery, you gotta give me a mystery that I, as the reader, can solve. If you're kind of withholding information or making it so I don't fully understand the world until you reveal that that's what the world can do, it doesn't really feel fulfilling. In the second half of this book, I was kind of checking out. I was way more interested in learning about the world building and sort of the blend of sci-fi and fantasy we get from here. Robert Jackson Bennett is one of the most creative world builders writing fiction right now. And unfortunately, in all 3 of the series that I have started from him, I have had some sort of major lacking from the other things that are really detracting from this cool world that he builds. While I did like the characters here more than I did in, say, City of Stairs, so much of this book is about investigating. There's some things here and there that I could figure out just from what they set out for me, but it kind of feels out of grasp for the reader, and you're just supposed to go along with it. This is one of the highest rated fantasy books that's come out this year, so I was really hoping that I would finally have a win from this author since Foundry Side, but unfortunately this is just ending up as a 3-star. The next book that I read was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I accidentally read this exactly during Banned Books Week. I was so proud of that. Actually, if you'd like to check out my Instagram, I made a post about Banned Books Week. A lot of research that went into that, especially about stuff that's happening in my state, which is one of the worst states when it comes to banning books. The Bluest Eye is one of the most banned books in America, and it definitely has some really sensitive subject matter that I do think is clear to the reader from the opening line, let alone the opening section of the book. Yeah, definitely content warnings are necessary for this book, but that does not necessarily mean that banning should always be the answer. This is mostly about a girl named Pecola who is growing up in 1941. She's 11. Pecola has grown up in a really rough household, and she is a little black girl in a world that celebrates little white girls, and she has been told her entire life that she is ugly and she wants nothing more than to be a white girl with the bluest eyes you've ever seen. We mostly see around Pecola, there are these two girls who live near her who have a little bit more tenacity and more support, who are observing this girl go from beat down to worse than that. And this is about how self hatred and internalized racism can really hurt people, and especially those people who are vulnerable, like young Black girls. This was Toni Morrison's first book, and I really got a lot out of this, especially after I read the book. I did a lot of reading about what I just read, and I think that that was really helpful because Toni Morrison kind of, she jumps around from place to place. I also would like to say I read Beloved a couple years ago on audio, and I had a bad experience with it because it jumps around so much, like even during chapters, and the audiobook was so quiet that it was really hard for me to follow. And I will one day reread that physically, but this book, whatever the audio copy I had, was good, and the jumping around was at a manageable amount for an audiobook experience, so I would recommend that. It is read by the author. This is so much with so little time. It feels very deliberate. Like every single word that she says is very purposeful. There's a lot of symbolism in this. There are a lot of terrible things that happen on the page of this related to like sexual assault. And that is something that you're like warned about very early on, exactly what's going to happen, but you do actually see it occur. And it's so difficult. You are put in the eyes of literally everybody seeing these different events from different points of view, that you really cover the same ground so fully. And everybody is so well characterized, no matter how little time you spend with them. There's nobody here who's just like this evil, cartoonish villain. There are people who have been beat down and have hated themselves for so long that they have just turned themselves into terrible people. This is not a happy-go-lucky book. This does not leave you with any warm fuzzies. It's not like The Color Purple where everything just turns around and people get what they want. I think this does so much, which is obviously a popular opinion. She's got a Pulitzer and a Nobel Prize, so I'm nobody to really be saying that she's a genius, but she is, and I'm so glad that I had a better experience with this book so I could actually enjoy it. I think I might probably prefer the plot of Beloved, but I had a better experience reading this book. This is between a 4 and a 5 star. I don't know, I think I need to sit on this one, but I absolutely would recommend it if you have looked into the trigger warnings. Then I read The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. This is a new fantasy title that is about our main character, Cassie. She is working at a bookstore. There is this old man who is a regular who ends up dying in front of her, peacefully, painlessly, but he leaves behind for her a book that calls itself The Book of Doors. And when she starts experimenting with it, it turns out that this book can make a door turn into any door. As long as she can picture a door, she can open her bedroom door and be somewhere in Paris that she's been. And it turns out that there is a secret society of people who know about these different types of magical books, and The Book of Doors is a uniquely powerful book that a lot of people would kill to have their hands on, and there is a man trying to help Cassie get the book off of her hands, but also wants to destroy the book. This has been compared to, it was like Matt Haig, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and The Night Circus, and I do think I agree with that. Thematically, it's the same flavor of fantasy, but I do think that this gets a little bit more intense. There's a little bit more action in this than in those types of books. So, I don't know, I feel like this book feels like it was made to be a movie. Like a blockbuster. There were some things that I quite liked about this. I really liked how the magic was developed. There was a reveal about something that happens with the magic that I was like, oh, that's one of my favorite things. I love when they do that. And it definitely went in directions I wasn't always expecting, but like thematically, it definitely had things that I was expecting those types of beats. I think I had a good time with this. At the beginning, I was a little bit more invested than I was toward the end, but I don't know how long that this is actually going to stay with me. And now we're having sunset on my face. I don't know how long I'm actually gonna remember this book for, so it's getting in the 3-star range. Then second to last, I listened to The Silvered Serpents by Roshani Chokshi. This is the second book in the Gilded Wolves series, which I started last year for Friendathon. And I honestly had thought about DNFing the series, and then I had a reading challenge that I had to do this month where I had to read books that had S as the first letter of the title. So I just decided to pick this one up because it was available from the library. The Gilded Wolves is a YA historical fantasy heist novel that involves a secret society that wants to rebuild the Tower of Babel, and our main characters are a group of young people around the time of the World's Fair in Paris. And in the first book, they are trying to get this magical object in this crazy heist. And this is definitely one of those books that's kind of set up like Six of Crows. We've got this group of young people like trying to be this like found family type thing. In the first book, I felt like I wasn't as invested as the book was trying to have me be. And I thought in the first book that it was because I was kind of going through it quickly because I was in a readathon. But in this book, I really just wasn't that invested. I was kind of rolling my eyes at a lot of things. I read The Last Tale of the Flower Bride earlier this year, and I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed the writing. And then listening to this audiobook, the writing style was really not working for me. It felt really overwritten for what this book is about. If I was, 10 years younger, I think that this might be a book that I was interested in, but I don't think that this really like branches out to the adult audience. If you're not invested in the characters, there is a little bit of that heist element, and I was kind of following along with that, but like it isn't enough of the focus for that to win over me not caring about the rest of it. There's a lot of people not telling each other different things about themselves. There's a lot of like pining, and I can get why people like it, but ultimately like it just didn't work for me. If Roshani Chokshi writes more adult stuff, I'm 100% gonna read it, but I needed to get rid of some series, and I decided that I didn't like this one enough to continue on with the series, so I am DNFing it. So that's one fewer series that I have on my list, which is good for me. I don't think this book is objectively bad, I just didn't care. So is that a 2 range or is that a 3? Maybe a 2.75, just below a 3 or something like that. And the very last book that I read in September, if you watched my fall vlog, you saw that I did a try a chapter tag between One Dark Window and another book, and The Spellshop was that book. And I really enjoyed this one, guys. I kind of can't stop talking about it. Our main character is a librarian from this spell book library in the capital of this empire, and when her city is being sacked by a rebellion that's trying to overthrow the empire, she saves hundreds of books, sails by herself to the island that she grew up on, and she is going to have to restart her life. And she doesn't really know how to do that. Her and her pet sentient snake plant, they decide that she's going to run this jam business there, living in her parents' old cottage. But she ends up figuring out that the island is not how she remembers it. The island is kind of like drying up. Livestock and the flora and fauna and everything like is just not how it used to be. And it's because the Emperor's sorcerers have stopped coming to fix things magically, and it is illegal for anybody but the Emperor's sorcerers to do that type of magic. So, Kiela decides that she is going to subtly have her jam shop actually be a cover for a spell shop. She is going to be doing illegal magic to try to fix the island. And of course, she's a very isolated and grumpy type person, very spiky. She also has a hot neighbor who is a merhorse farmer who wants nothing more than to help her out. Is this the perfect cozy fantasy for me? It's very possible. This felt like Legends and Lattes mixed with the very secret society of irregular witches, which is also one of my favorite cozy fantasies. I think I gave that a 4.5, and this could be a 4.5 or a 5. I really enjoyed Keela as our main character. I loved all of the side characters we get to know in this, and I loved the flavor of fantasy this is. Like, it is in like a high fantasy world, but the magic is very witchy But I really like that this is about trying to subtly rebuild this community for fear of like retaliation, but it's while she's also like coming out of her shell after being such an isolated person for so long. There's just a lot to love here. I also liked how much of this was the more serious fantasy plot mixed with the more fun, cozy vibe. Like, this is definitely like a kind of cottagecore feeling book, but there is like, we need to save the island or else like people are going to go hungry. And I think that this has a lot of anti-colonial messaging. I also think that this has been pitched as a fantasy romance. I don't think this is a fantasy romance. If you think Legends and Lattes is a fantasy romance, this is a fantasy romance. Like, this is about the same amount of romance. Like, it's a subplot for sure, but it's not the main thing going on. I just really enjoyed the balance of this. I loved our characters. I love the plotting. I love the vibes. There wasn't anything that I didn't really enjoy about this. This was one of the most happy making books that I've read this year, so I absolutely recommend it. That's all I've got to say because I need to go because lighting is going. So those were all of the books that I read in September. What did you read in September? I'd love to know. What are you reading in October? Have you read any of these? Do you want to read any of these now? If you'd like to follow me anywhere, you can find me at that link in the description. And if you'd like to keep watching my videos, I've got a lot of fun stuff coming up soon, so you can hit that subscribe button. And as always, I will see you in the next one.